Welcome to another episode of Transcontinental Overload. Let's get right to it. It's quite a story. My guest today is Brenda, and she is such a wonderful storyteller. I think this episode could have easily been 2 or 3 hours long. And who knows, I might invite her back at some point because I feel that there are so many more things that we could have talked about, but we just didn't have time. Anyway, you are in for a treat. Brenda is originally from a small town in Nebraska in the US, and she calls herself a Nebraska farm girl turned global adventurer. She made her first trip to Tanzania in 2001 on a whim, and actually met her future husband during that first trip. But it took them another few years until they decided there was more to their friendship, and they got married, had twins, and started a safari business in Arusha, Tanzania Choice Safaris. Brenda also has a blog, The Joy of Life is Love, but she says she's too busy these days with the twins and working on their business and setting up a new farming business because, as you can imagine, this last year was not a good year for safaris. I have put all the links to Brenda's endeavors in the show notes, and yeah, please make sure you check them out. They are constantly working on new projects and new ideas, including some virtual safaris. But enough said, let's hear Brenda's story. Welcome, Brenda, to Transcontinental Overload, the couples edition. I'm so excited that you're here and being part of my very first guests for this new season. So you're American in Tanzania. How about you tell us how that happened?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you. The short version of our story is just a little more than 20 years ago. It was January of 2001. I went on what I thought would be my one and only trip to Tanzania. And when I got there, Kakasi, who is now my husband, was our safari guide. To fill in a little bit about how that all ended up working over the last 20 years.
Jump the gun in the first sentence.
Well, that first trip did not end up being my one and only, but I fell in love instantly when I arrived in Tanzania, but not with Kakasi. I fell in love with Tanzania. And it really was a trip that I joined a group it was a trip that was organized as part of a partnership between the Lutheran Church in the US and the Lutheran Church here in Tanzania. There's a lot of history between the two churches. And that was what the opportunity was for me to travel here. And I completely chose to do it on a whim. It was a complete whim.
So was that your first time doing a big church trip like that?
First time traveling internationally. I had to get a passport to go with this group. And I decided only about 6 weeks before they were leaving. And so it was like, a colleague who was organizing the trip was telling me about it. And he said, well, you should go. We still have some space in the trip. And so at this time I was 30. And I had not ever even flown on an airplane until I was 28. But in those 2 years, in the job I had at that time, I did a ton of domestic travel within the US. I would travel, I might go to Texas, be back home less than 24 hours and on my way to Connecticut. I traveled all over the US and had this travel bug and was kind of wondering when I might have an international opportunity. So I think when my friend said, come with us, I just didn't even think about it. I was like, sure, I'll come. And I, at the time, could not have even picked Tanzania out on a map. I mean, I knew it was East Africa, but like if it was just a map with only borders and no labels, I don't think I would have picked the right one. I might have picked Kenya instead, So that was one evening after work. I said, I'll go. The next day, I went and requested the time off from my boss. He approved it. And then I asked him if I could leave early that day because I had to rush to the State Department of Records to get my birth certificate so I could apply for a passport. And 6 weeks then later, I was on a plane to Tanzania. And at that time I worked for a Lutheran ministry. And so it just was such a moving experience. And I just fell in love with the people that I met and the culture and the work of the church and all of these things. And so I just got this, and this is a common thing. I really hear this from a lot of people who visit Tanzania. Something about it gets in your heart and people want to come back. And so that's kind of where I was. And I did go back, and over the next about 6 years, I think I made about 16 trips back.
Wow.
And under different circumstances.
Yeah.
And in that first year, I also changed jobs, and I actually got a job with an international organization, a Lutheran humanitarian organization.
Did that make the trips easier?
Yes, some of those then became work trips, which was nice. So all of those trips that I was making, the one common factor in all of them was Kakasi, because I just really grew to like him immediately. When we met, we just became fast friends. He was a professional driver with access to transportation. He knew his way around everywhere, and he knew what seemed like every person or every other person on the street seems to know him. And so he was a great point of contact when I was coming, because a lot of those times I was coming alone and needed someone to help kind of navigate even culturally for me and get me from one place to the next, and somebody I trusted, I felt safe and comfortable with. So that was like 6 years of that. And he joked, I used to joke that he was my guard. And, because I just always felt so safe with him. Well, then it was, after that many years, it was like, well, maybe something else is coming up here for us. And so, we looked at things a little more closely. And then I guess it was 2008, he made his first visit to the US. And so that was kind of, I would say, is sort of our official start of our relationship. So we were, in that dating kind of mode, maybe for 2 years. We dated long distance, and then we got married in 2010. And then we were married long distance for 2 more years while we sorted out who was going to go where. And in that 2-year time frame, there was some visiting back and forth. And out of that came our twins, Max and Ellie. They were born within that 2-year time frame.
And where were they born? Were they born in the US or in Tanzania?
Yes, they were born in the US. And actually, I solo parented them for the first almost year. They were 11 and a half months old when we moved to Tanzania. And that was the first time that Kakasi met them in person. He was not able to be there. No, he wasn't. That was something that was a hard lesson we learned once we were married. Previously, it was very easy for him to get his visitor's visas to the US. But once he was married to an American who was still living in the US, then that became a little more iffy, I guess, for the US embassy, when he would apply. And he got rejected 3 times from the time when we got married. And so the twins were born, and I was on my own with them for that first almost year.
So I guess that made up your minds, the fact that he was rejected so many times, and then it was easier for you to go to Tanzania, or what? Did you feel?
Ultimately, the deciding factor was, when we looked at our skill sets, my background is in communications, marketing, fundraising. Those are pretty adaptable to a lot of different, contexts. He was born, God put him on this earth to be a safari guide. And, there's just not a big job market for safari guides in Baltimore, which is with them. He could have, like I said, he was a professional driver. He could have been, he could have driven a taxi, a bus, a truck, anything like that. But that would have sucked the life right out of him, because people who know him and who have been on safari with him just know that his heart is in it, his passion is in it. And he needs that kind of interaction with people, so to just, take somebody, drive airport shuttle bus or something, would not have been fulfilling for him. And I mean, then there was, the advantage was I already was working for an organization. And so once he and I were married, there was already some conversation within the organization about wanting to position communication staff, which is what I was doing at headquarters, in the field, into the regional offices. And there was a large initiative, a malaria, big malaria initiative that was being funded through a grant from the United Nations Foundation, and it was going to need communications people. So all the pieces fell in place for me to just transfer to a different position within the same organization and relocate. Technically, the position was supposed to be based in Nairobi, but Arusha is not so far from there. And a lot of what I was doing anyway with the communications work was here in Tanzania. So it really worked out nicely for me and for the organization. So and that's why we spent 2 years married and living on separate continents, because we needed, I'm very, I am a planner. I need to have some level of security. I mean, it was for me to just, we kind of got married and it was like, well, we'll figure it out. And we had faith that a path would lay itself out. But the fact that I had a job that was going to relocate me, there was a set, we had a salary and benefits and home leave, it was just a perfect setup for us then, so that we could be together as a family. And when I say be together as a family, besides Max and Ellie, Kakasi has 4 older children from before we were married. And so I went from myself with these 2 little babies into a household with 6 kids and a nephew. When I first moved to Arusha, then we also had a nephew living with us.
Wow.
Who was here studying Spanish to become a bilingual safari guide. And at any given time, we had between 2 and 3 live-in house helpers also. So it was a full house.
So your life
took a lot
changed completely.
Adjust to.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that for you, that's a huge adjustment, obviously.
Yes,
but
definitely.
It's your family, it's your husband, your children, and everything. But what did your family say when you said, I'm moving to Tanzania?
Well, I'm number 6 in the lineup of 7 kids. We grew up in a small town in Nebraska on a farm. And when I still lived in Nebraska, I was the furthest one. I moved the furthest from home out of all 7 of us. I was a whopping 105 miles from my hometown after I graduated college. And then I got this job in Baltimore, which I almost backed out of simply because I didn't know how I was going to tell my mom that I was going to the East Coast. And I lived in Baltimore for 11 years then before I moved here to Tanzania. But even when I moved to Baltimore, one of my sisters, I remember, commented and said, well, if any of us was going to leave Nebraska, it would be Brenda. And then when I came back, and I was, first of all, I'm marrying a Tanzanian, so that already people are wondering, when she's married, lives in Tanzania, what does that mean? Who's going where? So then when we finally, settled that I would move here to Tanzania, then it was kind of the same comment. Well, if anybody was going overseas, it would be Brenda out of the 7 of us, because everybody else is, 2 sisters live in my hometown about 2 or 3 blocks from my mom's house. One sister lives 10 miles away. My brother lives 15 miles away. 2 other sisters live in Omaha, so that's like 100 miles. So I'm the odd one out when it comes to that. So.
But I guess it in some ways, and it maybe sounds heartless, but it makes it easier because you're not like an only child who's far away with the only grandchildren.
Exactly.
So
yeah. Yes. For us, well, and when I came 2009, Kakasi and I were dating then, not yet married. I had a sabbatical with my job, a 3-month sabbatical, which I, not surprisingly, chose to spend most of that here in Tanzania. Spent a little sliver in El Salvador. But during that trip, my mom came to visit. Now, my mom also is not one to do much travel. She really had never flown. She had actually never flown until I moved to Baltimore. So she started flying to Baltimore. So that kind of paved the road for her. And then I was trying to convince her to come visit me while I was here on sabbatical in 2009, but it was like, I do that alone. And so I was trying to, who can come? And at my niece's graduation, my Aunt Karen was there, and Aunt Karen she was an adventure. All you had to do is make a suggestion to her, and she was ready to do something.
Oh, we love those people.
It's like,
yes.
It's like, oh gosh, I'm planning this trip to Tanzania. I wish my mom would come, but she doesn't want to come without, by herself. I wish she had someone to come with. And Karen's like, where do I sign up? What do I have to do? So here I am. And so these two women now came to visit us here just a few months shy of their 70th birthdays.
Amazing.
And I had, I coached them through getting their passports. I coached them through getting their international plane tickets, all these things. And those two ladies came when they were almost 70 years old.
Oh, and that must have meant so much too, to be able to share your life. And it's not, because I imagine, with anywhere you are, you want your closest family and friends to know your surroundings. I always find that's like, when I talk to people, I love to know, like, I can see where they are, and I'm like, I know exactly where you're sitting. I know your surroundings. It helps me so much, and I think it's so good for connection and that sense of having that.
Well, and my mom had met Kakasi, and Karen had met him too when he was in the U.S. visiting me.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot for her to kind of meet this man that I kept talking about. But there was still like this, by this point, everyone's wondering is this going to be a long-term thing, or will they get married? Where will they live? All of that, that's going on through her mind. And so when she came here and she saw, oh, this is a nice place. There's nice people, because of course, people who don't know what, they lump Africa, the entire continent, into one sort of category. And they think things like typical, what people would say is a village, an African village. And so, she got here and saw that we've got, all kinds of, modern technology and convenience and, all this thing, comfortable living. And, so that I think was huge for her to just come here and see. And now she knows this place. And so from then, over the course of these last 10 years, she's been to visit maybe half a dozen times, maybe more than that. I'd have to really sit and think. Now, she just, in a very recent conversation she's almost 82 now. She did say that she didn't feel like she was going to be able to travel here anymore. So that changes things for us. That's because we used to at least be able to know. Our pattern had become pre-COVID was she would come here. Usually she'd come here with one of my sisters every year, and we'd go there every year. The twins and I. Kakasi still can't get a visa, but the twins and I would go home. And so maybe at least once, maybe twice a year, we were getting to spend, like a good chunk of time with her. So now that changes things out. It's like, we've got to make sure we go there. So I'm kind of in this, well, come hell or high water, we're going to Nebraska in December. We're going to go home for Christmas.
So let's talk a little bit about Kakasi's family and how that went down when did he introduce you, and how did that go? Because you said he had 4 children from before you were married.
Gosh, so now I have to really think back. Well, because I was coming and all this time, all those years.
And you had been friends, right? So it wasn't like
yes. So I encountered a lot of his relatives at that time. And his father had passed away. I never met his father, but his mother at that time was still alive. So I visited her, and I I still remember this. Actually, I think maybe it was the very first time I met her. She was living on what is now our farm on Mount Kilimanjaro. We have a coffee and banana farm. But this was the farm Kakasi grew up on. So his mother was still living there at the time. We went to go visit her, and he said, "Oh, you just stay here. I have to run and someone." And so that sounds like he's just going to be gone quickly, and he'll be right back. And this was actually, we went there because was not exactly on our way, but it was kind of close enough to the airport. I was flying back to the US that night on the KLM flight. So it's like, let's just go see my mom, but I have to run over here to some neighbor. I'll be right back. But he was referring to Tanzanian time, so he was probably gone for at least 2 hours. And, I had a sliver of Swahili, but his mom was cooking, and I was sitting there with her, but I was in the line. She was cooking outside over a cook fire. And I was in the line of the smoke, and I thought, oh no. I mean, I was dressed and ready to get on a plane, and I'm like, oh gosh, this smoke is gonna, stick to like that smell, like when you've been around a campfire.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I have no way to explain to this lovely woman that I am now going to go sit on the other side of the house so that I don't smell like smoke on the plane. And I couldn't tell her any of that. So I'm just like trying to just sort of nonchalantly get up, walk around and wait. And so I'm sitting on the front porch finally when he comes back, and I was like, you need to go right now and explain to your mother that I didn't mean to be rude. I just needed to, get out of that smoke so I don't stink up the whole airplane and stuff. And which, he thought it was funny. And she was a delightful, their personalities are very similar. And you could see where he got his sense of humor from, and his so vivacious sort of personality.
She wasn't offended.
Really disturbed by it. Not at all offended. And so, and then when I was here on sabbatical then in 2009, one of the things I did is I went to language school. And so while my mom and my Karen were here, we went to go visit her. And my mom had brought a photo album. Mm-hmm. So these pictures of all of us 7 kids, my mom was like a celebrity here, because here this woman had 7 children, that's culturally, like, that's an awesome thing. And yeah. And so my mom brought this photo album. And so I sat down, and in Swahili, I explained everyone in my family to Kakasi's mother. And our mothers did get to meet.
Oh, I love that. It's almost like your mom helped you with the whole bonding process. I love it. That's fantastic.
So that was really, so over time, I met his brothers and his sisters, and they were just intrigued by me because they didn't necessarily encounter many foreigners. They, unlike Kakasi, who works in tourism, he's worked in tourism for 20 plus years. So he meets a lot of people from a lot of different countries. His siblings didn't necessarily. So they were always very interested to learn about, where did I live? What was it like? They were fascinated that my mother lived alone on her own, and that she did her own cooking and cleaning and drove for a car and, all of that. Mm-hmm. And one of my sisters is a nurse in a nursing home. And so I was explaining kind of in the US that when people get older and they're not able to care for themselves, that this is an option, unlike, whereas here, the elderly parents are cared for by their adult children. And I just remember when his sister, Mama Kami, was just listening to me describe this with such great interest. And then she said, do they allow you to go and visit them? And I thought, did I just describe a prison? I thought, I bet I sound probably pretty bad. Like, we put them away, we shut them off into these homes. And she's like, do you still get to visit? Yeah. I was like, oh, yes, of course you visit your family. They have, this way they're cared for by medical professionals if they have medical,
I guess it's a really tricky thing. Yes, because obviously, you come from like you said, they're in great care, and that they're well looked after. It's almost like but you don't want to criticize the way it's done in Tanzania where they're with family, because I guess there's all sorts of Woo.
And so, the question, I think this all came out of the question arose was about my mom. They were asking about my parents. Well, my father passed away several years ago. Oh, so who does your mom live with? Oh, she lives alone. She lives alone. Well, who washes her clothes? She does. Who cooks for her? She cooks for herself. Well, who takes her to places? And I say, she drives herself. And they're like, she drives her, they're just like, what? All of this. So when my mom first came to visit here, she was like a celebrity among Kakasi's family. Because now, not only is she living alone and doing all this, now she just flew halfway around the world. And one of Kakasi's brothers especially is really taken by my mom. And a few, like maybe 2 trips ago or 3 trips ago, she just in passing in conversation with him said she wasn't sure would she be able to come back. And he was very worried about that. So she did come back, and he was like, Mama has returned. We have to have a party. And this was her 75th birthday was around this time. So they threw a huge bash for her in the village. I mean, we roasted goats. There was singing and dancing. It was people from all around the village came, which my mom is not like, she just does not handle that kind of attention well. And so I was like, Mom, just go with the flow. But like, they just had this wonderful celebration celebrating her. Well, then she did make one more trip or 2. And so every time she was coming back, my brother-in-law is just like, we have to have a party, Mama's coming back again.
That's
She's
so lovely.
Still healthy. She's strong. It really is a delight. Yeah. I mean, hospitality really, really core to the culture. In fact, the word in Swahili, the word wageni means both guest and stranger.
Oh,
so that is kind of illustrative of how it's approached here, that strangers are considered, and people, they talk about, it's a blessing for us to receive visitors. So it's, and that's kind of a core, what would I say, like kind of a core belief or core of our business now that we're in tourism. We run a safari company, that we want our guests to experience our Tanzanian hospitality as much as we want them to have this adventurous experience of a safari.
So do you feel like, because you're married to a Tanzanian man and you're running this company together, that's where both sides really come together and you create this experience where you complement each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's our strongest feature is that we have this Tanzanian American partnership, because and our roles within the company are aligned to that as well. I am the primary point of contact when we have a potential client, and 98% of our client base are Americans. So they send an email or send an inquiry, they get me. And I spend all of the pre-arrival relationship building is with me. Now, we often will have Zoom calls with prospects and talk about, so we can answer questions and they can feel comfortable getting to know us. And so it's nice for them to talk with someone who, especially because a fair number of our folks come from the Midwest. So then it's like, here's the Nebraska farm girl, and these folks are from Minnesota.
Yeah, people respond to that. They feel safe. Yeah,
exactly. Right now I'm working with some folks from Washington, D.C. And so I'm like, oh, I lived in Baltimore. Actually, I take that. And another couple that are coming in June, they live in Baltimore. And so I'm like, I lived in Baltimore for 11 years. So there's always a way to make that kind of personal connection. If Kakasi is available, if he's around, if he's not on safari or he's not at one of our farms, he usually joins in those Zoom calls too, because he's the real expert. But I do all of the sort of pre-arrival relationship building, all of the work, communication piece. And then when they arrive at the airport, oftentimes when they step out of the airport, it's me and Kakasi there to greet them. And then Kakasi takes it from there because he's the local expert. And so they get my understanding of Western culture and sort of what the expectations are of an American traveler, I can recognize what they're going to want to know or need to know before they even ask. So I'm able to proactively answer a lot of questions and take care of things so they don't even have to ask those questions. But then once they're here, now they're with the man who grew up on the slopes of Kilimanjaro, the man, or one of our other guides. Takasi is our lead guide, so often they're with him. This is the man who grew up here and he knows the Serengeti like it's like the back of his hand, and he has this incredible passion for the wildlife, and he knows the culture. Takasi's lived all over Tanzania. So he speaks, there's 120 different ethnic groups in Tanzania. Every one of them has their own mother tongue. Takasi speaks several of them. I would say he speaks fluently about probably 5 languages. And so, and he knows these cultures. And so they get these stories of his childhood. He talks about he's part Maasai. So he talks about when he went for his circumcision as a young teenage boy. And so, they get that then, but always here I'm on the back end. And it's also, I'm a type A personality, super organized, all of that. So they get all of the benefit of having something that's really seamlessly organized, but they get the full flavor of Tanzanian culture.
And that's what they're there for, right? So then it's kind of,
there for. So and that's really affirming, because we do, that feedback comes back to us often from our clients, is how much they appreciate it. It's like the best of both worlds for them. And that's, it makes sense then that, so much of our client base is American, because we are also almost entirely referral based. We don't market broadly, and it's all word of mouth. Someone comes, they love it, they refer a friend or a relative, they come, they love it, and so on and so on. So it really is, for the client experience side of things, it's a perfect scenario. In the back end, we have our bumps, we have our cultural clashes when it comes to making decisions and who decides what, or that sort of thing. But we work through that too. With COVID, we haven't had much business at all for the last year, so we pivoted. We're working. Takasi's been gone now he ends up being gone for weeks at a time. We're starting a farm, a second farm. So he's there doing all of that work. And when he was going to go off to do that, we had a conversation. Then it's like, you're going to be gone outside of phone range, because where we're farming is close to the Kenyan border. So there's usually can't get a signal there. So I said, I need to know that you're comfortable with me making decisions without
you have to be very
when it comes to the safari business.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the household too, the kids.
How is that in terms of cultural differences of roles in the family and that kind of thing? How would you describe your relationship in terms of where did you, when you say some clashes and some bumps, where do you feel like the Tanzanian culture comes in, where you're like, okay, that's up to this point, but I'm not gonna accept all of it. So and vice versa too.
Yeah. Well, I'll say sort of from a cultural perspective, I would still describe Takasi as quite liberal compared to sort of the typical Tanzanian, Tanzania is a male dominated society. It's patriarchal. And he's first generation in his family to not have multiple wives. And so I think it's because he's been in tourism. He has been around Americans and Europeans for years now. And so a lot of that's kind of rubbed off, or he's learned about the broader world, and so in a lot of respects, he's very liberal, I would say, but he is still at his core, he's a Tanzanian man. So there is, sorry, now our dogs are barking. If I move forward on something without consulting him, where he feels like that should have been a joint decision or his decision, then that can be frustrating to him. And if he expresses that frustration to him, to me, I can feel frustrated with, well, why in the world would you not think I could make that decision myself? And, we've had times, like we've had really rough patches where that just kind of like, it just, fed off itself. And there was just this frustration. And I feel like, the last year or so, we've really learned our lesson about that. But we still, sometimes he makes decisions about something. And I'm like, what made you think you could decide to do that without even consulting me? Because 2 years ago, we had a really, really challenging time because I was having difficulty with my work permit here. And I had to leave I was gone. I went back to the US in 2019. I got back to the US for 7.5 months while we worked on this work permit issue. And one of the decisions he made without me was he bought a parcel of land. He bought land with the intent to build a house on it, someday. And I was like, what makes you think I want to live in a house in that part of the city, or why, but in his culture, he's Chaga, primarily Chaga, which are the people from Mount Kilimanjaro. Owning your own land is a big deal. Like we live in a rental house here in Arusha. We own our farm house, but we live in Arusha for our business, and we live in a rental. And that is like that doesn't align culturally with Chaga culture. And so he's always
interesting. Whereas for you, that's normal. It's,
I love this house. It's a big, beautiful house. It's it's a 5-minute commute to drop the kids off at school. It's like, I don't want to go anywhere. And especially not clear out to where he bought this parcel of land. I was like, that'll take an hour to drop the kids off at school, and I'm the one who does the drop off. So, so he felt like, it blew up over the phone.
God.
How could you do that?
Yeah.
And then he's like, that's my choice. I can decide this. This is my culture. It's important. And, once we slowed it all down and talked it all through, it's true. Culture. He thought he was doing the right thing because in his culture, a man should give his wife and family a home, and not a rental home, a home of their own. So he thought he was doing the right thing for us as a family. And, but I wanted to be part of that decision, which I think is also fair. So, we worked it out. We still have the land. There's no house there. Eventually, maybe someday there will be, but maybe not.
Yeah.
But that, and it would have never happened if I had been here, but it was,
Yeah. And then when it comes to, I imagine, so you have the twins. Do you feel like sometimes, like culturally, it's, obviously, so he has older children, but do you think he's different with the children he has with you? Or how does that the different background come into this? Because it's always with children, issues come up that you never consider because you just you don't think about those in advance necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I think Kaka's a wonderful father to all of his children. And he spent part of his, he was a single dad for part of the time. His kids with his first wife, when they weren't together anymore, the kids still stayed with him a lot of the time. So he kind of did the single dad sort of thing, and is very close, especially we have an older daughter. Her name is also Brenda. They're very close. But yeah, I do think that I'm sure that Max and Ellie's upbringing with Kakasi is different simply because who their mother is. And he knows that they're half American. And so there are certain things that certain things they have or experiences they get, approaches toward parenting them. That's just simply different because they're bicultural. And but I don't think the older kids resent the fact that, Max and Ellie have they're 9 years old and they've got their own electronic devices, well, when the other kids were 9 years old, those things didn't exist anyway. But one of the things that I've appreciated is really Max and Ellie have been sort of a unifying factor with the older kids and me, because of course, there's a stepmother and she's from a different culture and she's got different expectations. And we bumped heads. I bumped heads with older kids because when we moved here, they were living with us. 3 of the 4 were still living at home. And I had expectations. And
I can't
imagine. And they're living their culture, I'm living my culture, those cultures are different, and so that was really, well, it took a lot. And I'm an introvert, and Tanzania is a very extroverted culture, society. So even in my own house, I couldn't escape that because it was me and all of these Tanzanians. And so I have one of my best friends that I met here after I moved. She's American. Her husband is American. Also, they were here working with an NGO. And I used to kind of fantasize about what their home life was like. Like the project they worked with was very forward facing into the community. It was a community-based project. We were working with single mothers and providing affordable daycare for their kids so the women could work. So they were deep in the trenches of Tanzanian culture all day, every day with work. But I had this fantasy with them when they went home at night and they closed the gate inside their compound, inside their house. It was like a little tiny America. And I wanted that, I'm like, I can't escape it. I come home. I've been, maybe I've spent a day all out deep in the culture. I come home and I'm still deep in the culture. I don't get a break from it. So I was kind of jealous of they did. I don't know what I thought they did that was so American.
Isn't it funny though? Sometimes you have those moments, don't you, where it's just like, can it just be like this for once? And I get that. That's so funny. But I think that's anyone who lives in another country. And I think it's very different actually to be with someone whose country you're in, as opposed to, with someone from your own country and then you live somewhere else. I think that's completely different experience.
Yeah. Because it always feels like I'm outnumbered. It's like when those cultural clashes come, I feel like, well, everyone's going to agree with Kakasi because it's they're all from the same culture. And several years ago now, maybe about 6 years ago, I guess it was, at that time I was working here in Arusha for an international congregation, and we hired a Tanzanian woman to work with me, and she is my best Tanzanian friend. And what she's a delightful woman and really enjoyed working with her, but what she also became for me was like this cultural interpreter. And I could go to her and she could be like, Brenda, look at it. She could help me sort of understand. That's so wonderful
because your partner cannot be your interpreter all the time, right? It's too much pressure for a relationship.
She helped me understand my own husband sometimes. I'm like, why is he doing this? Well, she's the Tanzanian woman. She gets what Tanzanian men are like. She's like, well, Brenda, you have to look at it from the perspective. So so she's been such a gift to me too, because she can help me understand things from a woman's perspective.
Yeah. I bet your husband's grateful for that too. That you have.
And the other thing is she's grateful because when he doesn't understand me, he calls her too. And he's like, Brenda's this or says this, and she can say, but Kakasi, you have to remember, you're not married to a Tanzanian woman. You're married to an American woman. So you have to remember that when you look at what she said or did, and so she's, I don't know, I don't want to say she's our referee, but she's our interpreter.
That's amazing. Fantastic. Like built-in marriage counselor.
Yes.
So when Kakasi came to visit you in the States for the first time, so you said that was around the time you were kind of starting to think this was becoming a little bit more than just friendship.
Yeah.
How was that for your friends and family, and what did he think? What did he make of your country and culture?
And Kakasi is a great ambassador on behalf of Tanzania because he's just so friendly. And like I said, he personifies this cultural value of hospitality and friendliness. And so when he came to visit me in Baltimore, like I said, I live in a row house. So I literally shared 2 walls of my house with my next door neighbors. And I barely knew them. I knew them on each side of me. And I knew the one that lived across the street because he mowed my lawn. I didn't know anybody else in my neighborhood. And I decided I'd have a little party to introduce my friends to Kakasi. And all of my friends in Baltimore were my work colleagues. That's where I made friends because I went to work, I came home. And so we were planning this little get together. And he said, well, are you going to invite Ron? Are you going to invite Ray? These are my neighbors. And I was like, no. And he's like, why not? And I said, I don't really know them. And he's like, you can't have a party and invite your neighbors.
Yeah.
If we did that, if I had a party in the building and didn't invite the neighbors, So I was like, but then I found out he knew more than just Ray and Ron next door. Like he had somehow met other multiple neighbors. And we were at the supermarket a mile away from my house one day. And I'm like, from out of nowhere, I heard someone say, Kakasi. And Kakasi turns and he's like, oh, hi. And they're like, who is this? And how does someone supermarket know who you are? Well, he was gone at the off day. He was home.
Yeah.
And the doorbell rang in the middle of the day. And it was someone who, I don't know, I mean, this doesn't happen everywhere, but it's more this thing called a meat truck where like someone kind of does door-to-door sales of meat. And it was the salesperson. Well, it also happened to be the salesperson was originally from Kenya. And so I can only imagine when Kakasi opened the door and these 2 East African men locked eyes on each other. And still, like immediately recognized they were at least regionally from the same area, same region.
What a coincidence!
And so, like they of course hit it off, right? And Kakasi didn't mention it when I got home later. And so this was who we saw in the supermarket. Then was this man?
So funny. I love that. So other than Americans in cities not knowing their neighbors, what else did you think of US culture? Was there anything that really baffled him?
Well, like, Kakasi, even by that time, he'd been a safari guide for several years. So he'd spent a lot of time with American tourists. So he wasn't necessarily surprised about what Americans are like. But what he was surprised by when he got to the US is by what Americans have. And I remember, I lived in a typical Baltimore row house. It was like 800 square feet, so by American standards, I lived in a tiny house. But when we got there, he came in and he's like, wow, and so there's the main floor, we go upstairs, there's the second floor. And the next day I made a comment about watching TV and he said, where's your TV? I don't see you having this. Oh, the TV's in the basement. And he's like, there's more to this house? There's a basement too? So I was like, oh yeah. So we went down, I showed him the basement. It was like half finished, so that's where I put the TV. And I remember like that same day or later one day in that week, he called his sister and was telling her about how big my house was. And I was like, oh gosh, wait until you see some of the other people we're going to go visit while we're here. But one of the really funny things then was we started out in Baltimore because that's where I was living. We went to Nebraska to visit friends and family there. And we stayed with some friends in Lincoln. And we were leaving early that morning to, I think, drive to my mom's house. So it was a couple hours away. So we were leaving, a little bit early in the morning to do an early start. And I didn't want to inconvenience our hosts with having them have to get up and make breakfast. It was a Saturday morning. So in my mind, I had this whole plan out. Oh, we'll just hit a drive-through on our way out of town. And where they lived, there was a Burger King not too far away. So I didn't say any of this
That's
out
the
loud. I just
quintessential
thought it all to
American
myself.
experience.
We get in the car, we're driving, we turn onto 48th Street, we're going up. I pull into the Burger King parking lot. I drive up to the menu board, and we had already, since he'd been there a little while, we already kind of had this practice where I did a lot. I usually ordered for him because, what American menus, restaurant, they're like 48 pages long, and he doesn't, so I kind of,
I still freak out when we do it. I get my kids to order for me.
Yeah, because I remember we ate at a Red Robin while we were on that, and he just handed me the menu, and he's like, tell me what I should eat.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I knew what his tastes were. So I just pull up to this drive-through. The whole time I'm looking out the driver's window, right? I'm looking at the menu board, talking to the speaker. I place the order, pull forward to the next window. I pay. They're handing the bags of food out. I'm just still looking at the person, I'm handing them over to Kakasi, two humongous drinks, sodas or whatever. And I start driving again, and I pull over just because I thought, well, before I get back out on the street, we'll get stuff situated and open up the wrapper or something. And that's at the point where I turn to look at Kakasi, and he's sitting there like with his jaw dropped. And he says, you mean we don't even have to go inside to get food? And I was like, oh, no. We have this is a drive-through. You just drive up to a window and you get your food and you go. And he shakes his head kind of, and he says, Tanzania will never catch up with the US. And I laughed and I said, oh, wait. I said, do not judge America's societal development on the fact that we have fast food drive-through restaurants.
No.
That is not a sign of
advanced civilization. Yeah, love it.
This is not a good thing for Americans.
No.
So he kind of has his like handful of go-to stories about America. He was also taken aback by pets. Here in Tanzania, people have dogs, but dogs are not pets.
Yeah,
dogs
have a job.
function. Dogs are guard dogs. Yeah, they're dogs. And so, really, generally speaking, Tanzanians all have a pretty healthy fear of dogs, including Kakasi. And the friends that we stayed with, before we went through the drive-through, at that time they had a German Shepherd that was a house dog. Oh. Okay, so the first time we walked in, and Joplin, the dog, was like, I think she barked, and he was right away. And they were like, don't worry. Oh, she's just saying hi, and he's and I also have these wonderful pictures eventually of him sitting on the sofa, and Joplin, this full-size German Shepherd, is sitting on his lap.
Yeah.
And, by the end of they were best friends, but we were meeting some other friends of his, some previous clients, safari clients of his, and we were in their dining room, and their dog had like a dog bed in the corner, and the dog was sleeping there while we were eating dinner. And so the dog conversation came up about the dog, and Kakasi's, he's looked at his dog, and finally he's like, they're talking about what a good dog he is. And, and he says, yes, but what does the dog do? And, he's like, what's the function of this animal? And his friend said, well, now that you mention it, that dog doesn't do anything.
No.
He just, he's just here taking up space and eating our food, It took us years here. We've had dogs for a few years, but it took us years to come to an agreement on getting a dog or getting dogs, because Kakasi was like, he was looking for like German Shepherds or Rottweilers, which I love, but he was like, oh, I have a friend who has German guard dogs, and he said we can have one. I was like, no, we need
you want
pets.
A pet for your kids.
Children, we need pets. And he's like, no, but they need to protect us. They need to protect you because he travels so much. And I said, I promise you, if we get a dog or dogs, and that dog is our pet, and he loves us and we love him, he will protect us. That's how it works with pets.
Yeah. So before we end our conversation, let's briefly mention your blog. I mean, I know you said you haven't written anything recently, but it's still there. The Joy of Life is Love.
Yeah, I used to be I was fairly active blogger when I first moved here. And it was mostly kind of like I published this whole blog pretty much just for my mom to read, but other people would find it. And it was just kind of, especially when the kids were little and everything was so new here, every day there was something new and unusual that I knew my family back home would find fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't think I've posted maybe for 3 years. And I want to kind of pick it up again now because we're starting this farming project that's kind of new.
So that would be interesting because if you document that, because obviously your blog's going to be different now because the culture is not that surprising to you anymore. You don't write from that perspective anymore. It's different. Yeah. But that would be interesting.
One of the last posts I put on the blog was I even said that because I have another friend who's also from the US and she had blogged too those first few years. And we were just talking one day. It's like, nothing seems as new. Like we kind of have gotten used to life here. Yes. So things don't pop up as being obvious topics. But a few days later, we actually had a monkey got into our house here. And I said, that's blog worthy.
Yes. Yeah.
This monkey, I just caught this monkey sneaking through our kitchen window and stealing the bananas off my kitchen counter. So I wrote a blog post about that.
Perfect.
But what I have found is other people have found me through this blog and other women who are in or started a relationship with a Tanzanian man. And they want to know, I kind of have my whole list of, what my advice is, but because they're often very surprised when I do this rundown, like I did for you at the beginning, is like, well, we were friends for 6 years. Yeah. We dated long distance for 2 years.
Yeah.
We got married and lived apart for 2 years. And now finally, we're together because a lot of the binational relationships, I think that involve a Tanzanian are relationships that were born out of someone coming as a tourist or a volunteer and they meet like me, for a guide. I know someone else who now is married to the guide who took her to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. You meet someone in that context of this adventure.
Yeah.
And you're here for, maybe you're here for 2 weeks, maybe you're here for a couple of months if you're a volunteer, but it's a very short, tight time frame. And you can feel like you are in love and this is it and it's meant to be and whatever it takes we'll be together. And one of my two of my key pieces of advice for those women who ask what I think is, one is take it slow, pump the brakes on this a little bit, because this was Kakasi and me. Even after all those years of friendship and dating before we even got married, still that entire courtship and friendship was always in the context of me being here on vacation or him being in the US on vacation.
Yeah.
When I had a great job, a good salary, excellent benefits, my own house, we had all the possible advantages. Yeah. And so our relationship kind of formed out of this fictional framework. It's like life is not a vacation. And once I moved here and now we had children to parent together, and my job here, my full-time job that I came here with was a 15-month contract. So then I was out of a job, out of full-time job. I continued to freelance. We were trying to start our company, our safari company. And all of a sudden it's like, we're not on vacation anymore. This is not my sabbatical, my paid sabbatical anymore.
Yeah.
And it got really hard when reality really hit. And it was then once that stress of life comes is where those cultural clashes come up.
Of course.
And so that's my other advice to anyone is don't get into anything long-term. Don't lock yourself into something long-term or supposedly permanent until you have survived at least one very serious cultural clash with your partner. Yeah. You have to know what it's like and you have to know how to work through it.
Yeah.
Before you get married.
And I guess have some sense of, I don't want to say just financial, but have some sense of security that where you can be, you can walk away from this and not be at a complete disadvantage. And I think that's,
Yeah.
I imagine the whole romanticism of it, the romantic kind of idea of going and falling in love. And it happens, and you do fall in love, and your brain just goes a completely different down completely different avenues. But and it's beautiful. But yes, I can only imagine that.
What could be more romantic than going to Africa and falling in love with your safari guide, right? People, when I tell people our story, that's so romantic. And I was like, well, kinda, yeah. For the couple of years, it was romantic. Now it's like, now when we're arguing over who needs to do the dishes, or whatever else, or we're arguing over the budget, that's not so romantic anymore. But I've seen, like I said, I know other women who are saying similar stories. They came here, tourist or volunteer. They got into a relationship with their guide or someone working in tourism. I've seen some beautiful stories. I've seen some very painful endings. And it's usually, what I've seen mostly is women come here and get involved with men. Yeah. I've seen some women get very, very hurt and make hasty choices and sell all their stuff and move here, and then they get here and it's not going to work out the way they had dreamed it would. And so that's why I say don't, it's like pump the brakes. I very distinctly remember one that contacted me through my blog, and we had lunch together, and I started describing my story, and I could just see her face kind of fall as I was saying friends for 6 years, for 2 years, because I think she had in her mind that my story was like hers, that I had come and we fell in love and we got married and we're living happily ever after. And she was like, thinking, oh, you did what? How long before you dated? And I really think she was hoping I was going to tell this I was going to affirm this fairy tale story. And then I didn't. And I think she was disappointed and then a little bit nervous for her own situation too. Like what was she now getting herself into just too soon, or too fast?
Solid advice. Yeah. People need to be going into those things with open eyes. I mean, anyone in any relationship, of course.
Yeah, that's what I say.
Something like that is it's just because it's such a different culture. It's an extra layer of obstacles.
Yeah.
Well, Brenda, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. And I'd like to ask you one last question, because I like to do this ending segment. If I asked Kakasi, what would he say is the most Tanzanian thing about you now? How Tanzanian have you become?
I think he would say that I love mbuzi choma, which is roasted goat meat. And it's it's really at the core of Chaga culture. His ethnic background is weddings, any kind of celebration. It's, roasted goat is like the core, and goat meat is used a lot for communal, it represents community and unity and celebration and stuff. And I love it. I love it, so, even sometimes he'll be like on Friday nights, there's part of the city called Kwamro where it's their specialty there is they roast and Friday night, right? You go there, it's really busy. So the meat's fresh, and he'll call and say, don't make supper, I'm bringing home a leg of mbuzi, goat leg. And I'm like, yes, and the kids, both Max and Ellie love it too. And I mean, I have these hilarious pictures when they were smaller. It's roast goat, like for a wedding or something, roasting goat. So, so they like, once they carve up all the meat, they boil the head, they boil the hooves. And I have these hilarious pictures of Max and Ellie when they're little tiny, like standing over this platter that has a goat head on it that they were like first in line to get a bite of, to get a taste of. And so
that's amazing.
So I mean, Tanzanian, Ellie, our daughter, I call her a little chaga lady. She loves Tanzanian food. Complete, like you can put any kind of Tanzanian food. She loves it. Max, he's a little more American with his tastes. So we say he's got the stomach of his mother and Ellie has the stomach of her father. But when it comes to mbuzi choma, roasted goat, they both love it.
Unified.
And so do I. So I would say that would be,
Lovely.
we each have this love of Tanzanian food.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, what a story. I so enjoyed this conversation, and I absolutely love the way Brenda talks so openly and warmly about her life in Tanzania, including all the bumps and clashes. There is so much healthy realism in there, but also so much warmth and just that love for her husband and her life in Tanzania in general, I think come across really strongly. I really felt that. Make sure you visit the Kimaro's website, tanzaniachoicesafaris.com, and if you're planning a safari or thinking about it, gathering ideas, or you know someone who is, then you know where to look first. Oh, and before I forget, you can actually see Brenda's family in action. If you're in the US and have access to Amazon Prime, they appeared on House Hunters International back in 2015, season 78, episode 2, A Family Safari in Tanzania. And of course, I've also included that link in the show notes. And that's it from me for today. Stay safe out there, celebrate life, even the small things, maybe especially the small things. Love your people, and I'll see you next time.